uses madness and mythology, right? And I think Silo is more interesting to me in that in the colonial and post-colonial articulation of queerness, myth and mythology is something that circulates very much. So when we think about the Twasa, and the Twasa is someone who, you know, we can allow to have deviant desires because, you know, they're being mediated by spirits from wherever and wherever. So, you know, it's okay that the Twasa can love other men. If it's a male Twasa, they can love other men. If it's a female Twasa, they can love other women. But as a sensible member of the nation, you can't love people of the same sex, right? So that's my academic argument around this question, right? But I do have a creative response to what the violence of the nation is. And it's written in the manner of a poem called To Black, which I now feel a little embarrassed because Konika is in the room, and she slayed us a little while ago, but I'm going to attempt. It's a 5-minute thing. Hope you all bear with me. I mean, I really think that it's an interesting articulation which opens up the space for conversation. Sorry. So it's called To Black, and I begin. To black is to many, many, many things. To be all of the things and none of the things. To be the things that make for the things to be done. To be the things that are made done. To be the things left when the done things are done. To black is to be the matchstick that strikes the flame. The ember that reverberates the etchings of flames. The charcoal simmering in the abyss of manipulated flesh. Crumbling into the ashes left in the aftermath. Discarded to the ground for the world to glide on. To be black is to be still in motion all the time. To black is to Winnie Mandela, with matchstick box in hand, vowing liberation. To black is to Zanyiwe Madikizela, exploited for their freedom, rejected for your refusal, forgotten and made the enemy. To black is to Winnie Madikizela Mandela, to be beloved and loathed, to be a member, to be a reminder of the fuckery, to make jokes about widowed mothers and children who lost their fathers to state evil. To be black is to be still in movement simultaneously. To black is to have punk as parents, to have parents who show up when unjust peace is on the table, to have parents who stand by, waiting, who sit and watch as tear gas and rubber bullets pellet your naked flesh, to have parents enabled and unable by freedom. To be duplicitous armed forces against their children, speaking in folk tongues and escaping collective precarity, refusing collective community. To black is to be fearless mothers and fathers, the ones you exploit to clean after us, the ones you don't see, the ones we trample over and deride, the ones who fight, the ones who lay it all on the line, the ones who capital knows to forget, to make unreasonable while digging the embers of the earth. To be black is to be disappointed all the time. To black is to desire martyrdom, to Sankara, Lumumba, and Biko, to be celebrated in death, locked in memory and nostalgia, in life, muted, silenced, impotent. To black is to live in gullible hope, to hold it close, to hold it up and wipe the smoke of disappointment, to defy and rise and move. To black is to resist, to refuse to past, to live in suspended reality, making real nightmares and hallucinations, bewitched by a future time, lived in the present past, making real futured futures. To black is to noise, to invent a noise, to weave a syncophy of the indelible time, to learn us, a mellifluence, always in baritone, To black is to shift, to dance, to lift one leg in the air, in abandon, to keep the other steady, stuck to the ground together, always shifting, changing, moving. To be black is to be still and in motion all the time. To black is to exalt, to worship with every ounce of last breath, tears streaming, tongues spattering, believing for miracles, seeing miracles, madness normalized. To black is to love, making love, to edge deeper than deep, to shake the core, to make quiet, to labor in ecstasy, to deplete in faith accomplice, in coup d'etats of the soul. To be black is to be glorious all the time. To black is to be expansive, to expand, to open up the limited and limiting, made for so long. To black is to bula sekele, to vula isekele, to extend the perimeter and make as many come in, to interest beyond yourself, to want for more than yourself, to make real for us. To black is to native informant, to make meaning and decode, to scholarship and theorize yourself for their consumption, betraying while loathing, anxiety choking, but always, to black is to community, to open up to black.
Thank you very much, Tato. I think the meeting places of the two responses, or two parts of the responses, produce very interesting play and provocation. Kosi, speaking about provocation, in your work, in the different registers, I mean, in your first two collections, and in your first collection of poetry, of short stories. One of the things that strikes me as someone who, as you know, is a huge consumer of your work, a reader and rereader of your work, is the way in which one of the kind of threads that recur. Thank you, Panashe. That recur in your work is the importance of holding contradiction in a way that enables taking both violence and pleasure very seriously. Which, it sounds like an impossibility. Why are you looking at me like that? It sounds like an impossibility in and as of itself, but if I think about, for example, these hands, both the collection and the signature poem, right? That it's a very serious poem. It's a very difficult poem, but it's such a sexy and beautiful and affirming poem at the same time. And so, and I mean, I find that this is something that kind of recurs in much of your work. That not only, and the pleasure is not just in the absolute bliss and transformation and visceral pleasure in reading what you can do with the word, but also that pleasure itself, that the relationship between pleasure and violence itself seems like something that you care deeply about exploring. Does that sound? It doesn't sound like what you're doing?
You're so powerful, you don't even know you're doing it.
Thank you, sister. Hey, Pumla. What, Kosi?
I'm just trying to think about where to start.
Because
I hear you. So a part of me wants to give a simple answer like, but that's life. Because in a sense, our lives are like that. We live in these kinds of spaces where there's violence and pleasure and this all the time. And so what I try to speak to when I write is to stand against the writing that is only focused on one part. Okay, so for instance, where in the short stories, one of my concerns has been about how men write about women, you know, the victims, the this, the that, they're not whole as characters and all of that. Now, we know that at some point women are victims because we live in a patriarchal society, but they have a way to deal with it and they have a way to be whole. So when I write my stories, I want to not pretend that the other thing is not happening, but I also want to say women also have, you know, pleasure, they have agency, they can talk, and they occupy spaces that are their own. Somebody said, for instance, after reading Running and Other Stories, which is a collection of my short stories, the 10 stories there, and only one of the stories has the main character who's a man. And she said, I'm not sure that this collection works for me because we're talking about women almost in isolation. And they're not with men. And I thought, but these are the stories of our lives. You find in communities a lot that women have a way of organizing, not formally, just a way in which they occupy their own spaces all by themselves, first and foremost. And then they're the ones who are organizing quite consciously for a particular cause, whether they're in an NGO or whatever. But those are the stories of our lives. So what's wrong with honoring that? What's wrong with surfacing that and making the book about that? So, yeah. But I also want to link this to the idea of the title. I don't know what the organizers wanted to talk about when they wanted us to talk about the quiet violence of the nation, because I think the violence of the nation is so loud.
Yeah.
But I also imagine that they probably want us to work with the title a bit, because the work that I'm writing, which is what you're referring to, is about the quiet celebration of queer. So there's this loud violence of the nation. And for me, the work that's come through since Silo, because this is who we're evoking, it's very quiet. It's there. And it's everywhere. You just have to look for it and find it. And some of us are creating it.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So you say, so what is the, so you talk about the violence of the nation is very loud, which obviously resonates, not just with me, but I mean from the responses of the other people in the room, the ums and the ahs, right? And so what is it about a loud celebration, the loud violence of the nation that suggests for you as writer that the celebration of queer needs to be quiet, not silent, but so what are you saying about the quiet? It seems to me, I mean, you're saying something quite complicated about the quiet. Could you say a little bit more about why it's the quiet celebration of the queer?
I think it's
as opposed to, for example, an equally loud celebration of the queer, and why that doesn't work for what you're trying to do.
I think if you look at the literature that's come since Silo, that could be termed queer literature. If you look at its content and its focus and its nature, for me it does, maybe, I won't remember her exact words. You know how Habiba talks about how she doesn't want to write poetry that's like being a political protest. That for me is what I'm talking about. You know, poetry can be very powerful in its nice, beautiful, quiet way and make a very loud statement. That is my sense of what this current queer literature is like. That's what it feels like to me. It's not saying, hey, 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 you know, it's beautiful literature. It's almost as if some of it is hiding in some spaces in a nice, quiet way. And so that's the sense I get of it, you know. And it's, at this point, it's also just not the nation as in South Africa. It's beginning to extend to the continent. And that's what it does, that beautiful, quiet celebration that says, we here. We don't care if you're listening, but we here.
And I guess what I'm also hearing is I mean, I suppose in the loudness, because the loudness very often is about, not to be unapologetic about loudness, but often the loudness is very often about the addressed as well. Whereas a part of what I'm hearing about what you're saying about the quiet celebration of queer is a softening right? Which isn't a weakening, which isn't a silence. It's a type of kind of confidence and creativity. Okay. Eusebius, I'm going to start by asking you a question that is probably going to annoy you a little bit because I keep asking you this question. I think you're sick and tired of me asking you versions of this question just because I want to keep hearing about it. So I want you to, you've been promising us, your readers, for years now, that your Dacre book is coming. And I know some of the, I mean, you shared yesterday in our conversation some of the reasons and some of the ways in which it keeps getting overtaken by other projects that have come out since, and also by the fact that you have so many jobs yourself. So my first question, though, is about, can you tell us about a little bit about what, we know something about why you felt compelled to write a book, but can you tell us a little bit about what is in the book?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Mabakazi. As I feel the quiet violence of your question, Pumla. So, for those who weren't there yesterday, what I was saying is that I'm not working, it's definitely not a kind of literary biography of Cello Dacre that I'm working on. As with you, I have some self-doubt around whether I can write biography. So Cello Dacre is a thread that will run throughout the book, because in some ways Cello Dacre's life and the connection between his life and his work exemplify some of the things I actually want to write about. But he will be a constant presence. And what I want to write about are a number of things. The one thing I mentioned yesterday was, for example, mental illness fascinates me. And the connection between mental illness and creativity in particular fascinate me. So there are three themes that will be in the book. The one is specifically around illness, our attitudes towards illness, how we live with illness, and the embodiment of illness. In other words, not just your physical body, which is what I'm particularly excited about with your book that you announced yesterday you're working on, the black female body in the world, but also psychologically we have an inner life that is deeply private, right? So there you have Cello Dacre celebrated for this amazing, just 3 books, and we still talk about him. Killed himself when he was very young, right? Enormous achievements. His inner life, his mental life, which obviously we don't know much about, we can infer a little bit from what we do know, what he was going through, must have been hectic. And I think a lot of creatives in particular, but human beings in general, experience versions of that. It is hard to live. I have gone through that myself. I've suffered anxiety. I've had to deal with it. I've got various kinds of illnesses that I haven't written about in the public space. And I'm constantly aware also things that can't be classified as illness, like noticing you suddenly have a bit of grey beard, just aging, how your relationship with your body changes as you get older. So the Eusebius at 25 is not the same Eusebius at the age of 37. So I'm deeply fascinated not just by illness, but also just by the aging process and what that does to your personal identity and in turn, your creative output. So that's like one segment. And you can see why Cello fascinates me, because that's an aspect of Cello that I don't think we have yet fully talked about, written about. 1 or 2 people tried. One of his ex-lovers came on my show in Power at 98.7, got flack from some other black writers for daring to talk about certain aspects of his private life. But I want to open that stuff up, right? So there will be some uncomfortable stuff. The second part of the book has to do with death, and you can see why death might loom imminently if you are worried about certain kinds of illness in particular. And death fascinates me, in particular, I think, fears that we have, and I'm trying to make sense of that philosophically. So the book will also draw a lot on my work in the academy as a philosopher that I haven't written about publicly because I've been consumed by, worrying about whether I should vote for the DA and writing about race. So the first big theme is illness. The second big theme is death. And then the final theme, which is the one that I'm most excited about, and hopefully I have an answer that's counterintuitive, although every time I tell someone who reads too much about the third part, I immediately, and I got one of them yesterday, get a link to someone else who's already written a book with the same thing. So I'm also trying not to feel like, oh my God, it has been written. But the third part of the book, Pumla, is about the meaning of life. And I'm very fascinated by the question, what makes a life worth living? I remember having a debate with, it was you, me, and Tasha's, and who was the third person? I think it might have been Lebo or someone. Well, you may not recall, but we were talking about whether it's a tragedy that Selo Dacre died young. And you made a point that partly segues into the third part of what I want to explore, which is, in many ways, it's, firstly, obviously, we don't have a counterfactual. We don't know what the Uwe of a Selo Dacre would be if he had a different kind of inner life. He didn't have the same mental challenges that he had, illness challenges, right? And so, in a weird kind of way, perhaps, without being macabre about it, a certain kind of chaotic, experimental life that you live, which is the life I've mostly lived until my current relationship, makes for a certain kind of writer, a certain kind of artist. And it then raises the question, what makes a life worth living? Do I regret or secretly wish I never suffered anxiety? Well, I don't. And so my intuition, and I'll stop here for now, is, and I draw on a lot of work in philosophy around the question, what is the meaning of life? I am fed up and I detest aspects of classical psychology and also in the popular literature, motifs about overcoming. So you've got to have this life that is filled with just happiness and hedonism or flourishing in some sense, right? And if you have that, if you've gone through like a drug binge, and this is why I love Brayu, but I also sometimes hate the messaging you give to kids. It's like, well, you were entitled to go through a certain kind of life, and your artistic output is inextricably linked to the chaotic life you live. But you want to say to someone else, role model yourself after my overcoming part of my life narrative. And so I think I will always feel ill at ease with my body. I'm always going to have certain challenges mentally that I'm going through. And what I want to debunk is the idea that the only kind of life that is a life worth living is either a life devoid of pain, or alternatively, if you've gone through pain, the last chapter better be ending with you looking beautiful and healthy. So, Selo Dacre, you can see why he fascinates me, because a life in constant struggle, rather than a narrative of overcoming, is what I want to work with in the third segment of the book, in terms of teasing out conceptions of meaningful life that don't play to this idea of never experiment, never set a foot wrong, never quit your PhD program. I mean, that's just bullshit. Life doesn't work like that. And if you are a famous Mandela, maybe you're going through something rough, it's, there better be a happy ending to the pain.
Yes.
So those are some of the issues that I want to explore. But to your very hard question, just a sort of 30-second answer, I'm really grappling as I'm hearing these beautiful responses to how loud the violence is. I still love the title of Selo's book. And it speaks to the contradictions that we can live with. On the one hand, the violence of racism, the violence of homophobia, the violence of misogyny is very loud to those of us who experience it. But its effects can also be deeply, deeply quiet. Which is why I said to you in the embarrassing confession that I'm attempting fiction. Part of my fascination with men who are on the down low is that there's a quiet violence they experience, in the sense that without excusing cheating and other kind of things, their inner lives are very difficult to make sense of. So the violence that may lead to someone living on the down low is loud. We can make sense of it structurally. We can write an answer for Pumla in the exam about it. But the experience of that guy, who's at the same time married, got a job at R&B, and after 9 he finds himself on Grindr, the inner life is a very quiet violence.
Wow. Thank you, Eusebius. Okay, so my next question is a question that I'm so happy I'm here to ask, which I think is a question that maybe sounds, I'm hoping, sounds different here than it would at a different festival. I mean, as we were sitting down, one of the things that you and I were talking about, one of the things you said was, oh, it's so good to be here, to be able to talk about, you know, to not worry about kind of anthropological gaze and having to, you know, like, I see some people are nodding and some people are frowning, and that's fine. I'm going to leave it like that, because I like nods and frowns. But my question is, starting with you see this, but it's really a question, I guess, for Tato as well, which is about why is it important? Why do you think it's important to, because these are things that concern you generally, right? These are things that you talk to your friends about over lunch. These are things that you talk to your partner about. These are things that kind of live, conversations that live in your head. Why do you think it's so important to visit these and revisit these as in writing? And why do you think it's important for you as a black writer specifically to be talking about issues of health and desire and all of these things now? At all or now? I mean, why? So I guess the question I'm asking is, why is it so important? Tado, your poem was about the messiness and the beauty and the troubledness and the possibilities of blacking. And Eusebius, you're talking about, well, how we can talk differently, and you know what black people can and cannot. I suppose the pressure, what we can and cannot talk about. Somebody in the questions yesterday said, well, I mean, surely sometimes we feel like we have to work very hard to keep certain walls against certain intrusion into black life. And it seems to me that some of the quiet is implicated in that, right? In issues of privacy, issues of safety, but also issues of I don't know what the word is. Kind of the internal, I suppose, conflictedness and the space to think about messy desire, because we do. We think we don't live these kind of coherent lives. Because no human beings do. So why do you think it's important, though? Or do you? Maybe you don't. No, maybe this is my issue. Maybe this is my thing about why is it important for us as black people to be talking about?
For me, the answer is very simple, actually. Because we need to have a more honest depiction. If an alien lands and reads everything that we've written as writers, they need to get a full understanding and the richest possible description of what kind of lives we completely lived. So I'm going to steal from Kosi's answer earlier, you know. Life is complicated, there's pleasure, there's also the violence, and we've got to surface those complexities. Well, the same is true of us. I mean, if I didn't write, and I hope I will finish those projects, if I don't write about them, and someone only reads my stuff, say, on race, they may think that the only thing he obsessed about was race. I also obsessed about classical music. I played classical piano. I played chess competitively. I care deeply about it. I care very deeply about policing hot men in the room. And I've noticed a couple, right? So if I have, if my inner life has a richer range than my output so far suggests, then I think I owe it to myself, and therefore to us as black people to be able to do that. Whereas currently, you know what I mean, like, I'm speaking of my own writing. My writing, if you do not know me personally the way you and I know each other, you will get a very partial picture of what my concerns are. Now, if we take black writing, if such a thing exists, as a whole, the same exists, and that for me is what's important. I mean, talking about coming out of the closet as experimenting with fiction, I also want to come out of the closet loving Chopin, loving Jean-Paul Sartre, Immanuel Kant. Those are things that matter to me deeply.
You love Kant?
Yeah.
You obviously not so much other kind. Which I do, but I'm sure both of us do. That's fine. He mentioned philosopher.
So without even overcomplicating it, it's just about giving a more accurate depiction of the full range of things that concern us. And I'm a straight virgin, by the way.
So I think I agree with Rushiris a lot there. I think one of my preoccupations is, I know that I grew up gay, right? So I know that for a fact. Nothing happened to me no one touched me when I was a particular age. I was not mediated in a particular way in order for me to show up in the world in a manner that I desire men, as romantic, sexual, intellectual, spiritual, emotional partners, right? So it concerns me the ways in which then I am not legible in literature, particularly. So I'm never written about, right? So what I do is insert myself into the canon a lot of the times. If you read my writing, I mean, I gave a manuscript to someone, a dear friend who's in Harvard right now, and he said to me, you know, your protagonist, I sense a lot of sensibilities in your protagonist. And I was like, for sure, because I was writing about myself. Because have you ever read a book like this where someone like this person has been written about, right? And it's a deep preoccupation with what I do in the literary, right? But also intellectually, academically. But also I think for me, there's something about how we must disavow ourselves with national sentiment, right? And so when the nation says you do not belong, when you've been negated by almost sort of like a double negation, right? So black people are negated in the world, and then you're a black queer person who then is negated by the negated, right? So what happens with those of us who are doubly negated, right? So we need to be doing a lot more of the work of, I call it ruining sentimentality with belonging and nation, right? Because then it allows us to form different types of kinship, right? To form different types of family relations so that it doesn't have to be that you go to the family in Christmas, like a lot of us are going to go to our families and we're going to experience the violence, right? Because so much of our rhetoric is that, but your mother and your father, right? And for some of us, we can't breathe, we can't live in those spaces. So how do we create an idea, a future idea of a space where alternate forms of family become legible, right? Where we can bury each other. I know Zetu does incredible work on kinship, right? Queer kinship, right? And which comes out of personal experience where they had to go and bury a friend in Swaziland and the family didn't know that the person was queer, right? So it is this idea that, but you know, you have a mother and a father and you have siblings, which for me, intellectually, academically, even in my own life, I was telling a friend also over the weekend, we had a family event, and I was like, well, I'm Brother Killjoy in my family, right? Because I don't go to the side where the men sit under the trees and do the things of eating meat that's only seasoned with salt, but I also don't go to the kitchen and cook with the women. So I sit in the middle. And they consider me a difficult child. I have great sympathy for my mother because she has to tolerate all of this, right? But I sit in the middle until someone comes to me and says, we need you to do something. It must never be assumed that because you have a penis, because you have a vagina, because some of us don't have, right? And some of us have both, and some of us do not want to have those parts. We want to perform different types of gender roles. So how does that become part of the ways in which we imagine how we can reconstitute the nation, which then becomes the family?
Yes, good question. Good question. I think it's, no, I think it's a question. It's an important question to kind of sit with, not to rush to, because I think there's a lot there. So talk to me. I want to change tack slightly now. Talk to me. I very kind of quickly at the beginning talked about a prior conversation where he promised to send me something that he didn't send me, and he thought that maybe by not sending it, he would get away from me asking this question. Tarren, talk to me about talk to us about pleasure in all of that. Why is it important to write about pleasure in the specific ways that you do? And why is pleasure absolutely crucial in the kind of writer? So you know, pleasure in all the various ways. So kind of writing about pleasure, but the actual pleasure of doing the work that you do in the various genres. But also the fact that, you know, it is something that you write about, right? Not just the torment, not just the talk. So I'm very, you know, I think, as I said, you know, as I probably say too many times, the conversations about pleasure, that pleasure is always political for black people. It's always, you know, for all black people, it's always, it is political. But I also believe in weird things like entitlement to pleasure. So, which I think you share, right? You share some of that. So yes, that's the
I share all of
messy
that.
non-question.
I share all of that. I enjoy penises. So I write about people who enjoy penises a lot. I just don't describe what they look like, but I write about. I mean, I think it's so hilarious. So my friend, she was here with her 2 kids, right? And so during lunch we're having conversation, and her daughter asked me, "Do you have a girlfriend?" But these are people I've known like 6 months or something, and she's like, "No, I don't have one." "Do you have an ex-girlfriend?" "I don't have one." "Do you have a third ex-girlfriend?" "No, I don't have one," right? And then it's just like, "But why are you assuming that I could only have a girlfriend," right? So for me, just the insistence on saying to the world that there are people, I mean, and for me, I think it's in a lot of ways it's an indulgent project, right? I know for many of my friends who do not have the sort of family dynamic that I have, and so they don't have not that they don't have, however, there are restrictions in terms of how one can articulate their entitlement to pleasure, right? Because all of us experience pleasure, right? But the ways in which we then can articulate our entitlement to it in the world, right? So my fiction work is insistent on that. Dudu is publishing a short story of mine which I'm embarrassed every time I reread, because it speaks about like, no one had ever spread my thighs like whoever did, right? Because that's important, right? But then also, in the very same tone, to say, but I can never tell my parents that this is what's happening, right? Because...
Is your mom here?
No, she's not. Wouldn't be saying these things. Because, you know, for a lot of my friends, the people that I hang out with, when we are in Bram, when we are in Johannesburg, we experience intense, extreme pleasure, right? But then we have to compartmentalize it when we then step out of those contexts, right? So it's important that those two things live together.
Speaking about compartmentalizing and things leaking into, or not talking about things leaking into each other, but introducing that about the notion of not compartmentalizing. So, Kosi, I'm coming to you again, and I want to talk about pleasure, and I want to talk about leaking. I like leaking. Metaphorically and otherwise.
Leaking are you talking about?
All of them. So I'm talking about what Khabiba Badarun calls the leaking of meanings, right? So the capacity to not actually say, okay, this is who I am now, and I'm going to, but the capacity not just to kind of move between several solid boxes and identities, right? But to or even to kind of bring them into kind of conflict, but to seem to, so I'm saying leaking, but because it seems like a much more kind of graceful, unhindered movement between genres, between categories that seem that very often or present themselves, or we socialize into thinking as mutually constitute, like mutually exclusive, right? So, I suppose the questions, I want to ask you several questions, but I suppose that's the big frame for where I'm going. I'm not going to look at your face, because your face is worse than mine, in terms of expressiveness, because you're going... So the first, okay, so I'm just going to let you speak about that. And then I want to talk, but I want to talk about, so I want you to talk about why... And I'm choosing leaking rather than explode in categories. And I'm choosing leaking rather than just kind of fluidity and hybridity and all of these other... Because I think that they do... I think kind of talking about leaking meanings and leaking identities and leaking bodies allows a less measured way of thinking about the kind of work that you do, right? Both in the actual poems and short stories and essays, and hopefully this biography, because you also, I'm coming to you talking about this, because you're just like Eusebius. You're also like Eusebius talking about this biography, promising us a book for many years. But we're sitting here going, how course? Here's a new book out, maybe it's the knowledge of our, but it's not. So yes, please.
Okay, you said I must talk about pleasure first, right?
In any order you want.
In any order I want. Let me start by talking about pleasure, because there's a level of talking about pleasure generally, and a level of talking about pleasure as women, particularly sexual pleasure, that has been problematic as far as I'm concerned in the way that people write. Now, I come into it from a very simple, basic level. I used to be a nurse, and I became a psychiatric nurse, and one of the things that was very important around psychiatric nursing is mental health, and the fact that mental health encompasses so many things. And when I moved from there, I worked in an NGO that we call the Women's Health, and the big push that we wanted to bring into the thinking around women was that sexual pleasure should be sexual pleasure. Because at that time, women were thought about only as, bodies that must get pregnant, and therefore our intervention is making sure that women don't get pregnant, and we help them understand how they stop themselves from getting pregnant. So I spent a lot of time in the 90s in women's groups just talking about what it means for a woman to enjoy sex. And we would talk and talk and talk, and one of the fun things that I used to enjoy doing in a group is to say to people, who's ever taken a mirror and looked at what's between their thighs? And often, the majority of the room would never have done that. And I would ask the next question, so how many of you have children? And the majority of people would have had children. And the question then is, so you've never looked at yourself and you've had a child, how does that work? So I remember that there was a huge thing around women and their bodies that sometimes was at that level, where there was just almost a what's the word? Where people couldn't engage with their own bodies, like their bodies were foreign to them. Yes, alienation. And then on the other hand, you'll find a few women who could come into that. Now, let me just underline that I was working with much older women. It wasn't young people, because we had used the entry point of contraception, right? So it was often women who were much older. So I'll then give people homework. In your hotel tonight, can you masturbate? And then we'll talk about it tomorrow. And then, yes. And then the next day we'll have a conversation. And it always blew my mind how people arrived at an orgasm, women arrived at an orgasm for the first time after they'd had so many children, because they've never ever touched themselves. That used to pain me. So I'm saying this to give the background on how, therefore, I think, the leaking kind of thing happens, because because of my background, which is this kind of straightforward being a nurse, knowing bodies and not being concerned about nakedness and all of those things and things that leak out of orifices. You know, when you're a nurse, you deal with a lot of stuff. You know, things that come out of things and you must patch and do that and smell them. You know, that's the work. So there's a sense in which I'm kind of comfortable with that. And then there's the political side, which has been around women and their bodies and all of that, queer or not, just women broadly. And then what does it mean when you then sit down to write a story? So how does that work? So I think the leaking happens maybe automatically for me because of the kind of background that I come from. And of course, you know, then I sort of play around because, you know, when you're writing a poem, you're not doing the same thing as writing a short story. So I try to then work specifically with genres. But I think the automatic leaking is also based or comes from the kind of work that I've been doing in the past. Am I answering you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the second question? Can you just summarize it?
I forgot the second question. Let me ask you the third question.
Okay.
Speak to us about the biography. Of course, when is the biography coming out?
I don't know.
Every year you say to me this year, but now it's December, so obviously it's not coming out this year.
It's a lie. I've never said this year.
Of course, you said you were finishing it, and then you started and did a nursing research project.
I have never said this year. I don't know when the biography is coming out yet.
Why?
Because the biography at this point requires me to be paid a salary. And if I am not paid a salary, I cannot write that biography. So I have to have a job that pays me a salary, and then at this point the biography is my night work that I go and work on if I'm not too tired, if, you know, I'm finding it extremely difficult to work on this biography as part-time. Unlike a poem, I can work on one poem for a month, but after a month the poem will be finished. I can work on a short story for 3 months, it will be finished. Noni lived from 1919 until 2005. It's a massive life. It's a complicated life. I want to do the best I can to retell the story. And much as I believe that if I had been paid to just do it for 3 years, I could have finished. But what I'm finding is an advantage at having taken such a long time is that because her life was so complicated, I couldn't get some of the information as far back as when I started. When I started working on the Noni project, there was nothing on the internet on her, period. Right? That's just a simple example. But even things like you get an email from somebody you've never heard of who lives in the US and they say to you, I hear you writing a biography of Noni Jabavu. I used to know her and I have so many letters that I'm willing to donate. That happens in a particular time. And then what do you have to do? I waited for two years for those letters to arrive, by the way. But the point is, once they've arrived, then you sit down and then you read them. And then you go back, and then you insert, and then you insert, and then you insert. It was in one of those letters, for instance, where I found out the surname of the man that she had a child with.
Oh, wow.
The surname, not his first name. I know he was from the Caribbean. I still don't know the country.
Wow.
So there's a part of me that has accepted that maybe the long time that it's taking is going to allow for more information to come through. And when it's ready to be written, it will be written.
I love that answer. Okay, fine. Maybe you just say, yeah, maybe I don't know. But I seems like I have this memory. Maybe it's a false memory.
It is.
But I love that answer. And are we back on? I'm so confused.
Yeah.
So I'm going to. I have many more questions, but I'm going to I'm going to pause and ask the other people in most of the people in the room with us to give me an indication if they have questions or comments for I know, that's what I'm trying to share. I have, trust me, I have my 30 questions for each one. I can't see. Oh.
Yes. Okay, my first question that I've asked in these platforms. Yesterday, Mr. McKaiser, you talked passionately about mental health, and today I'm hearing that theme recurring, and Umama Naye is talking about that theme, and it is also something that I'm interested in, and something that I work with. And we deduce it. We deduce it differently. Say, for example, if we use the quiet violence of dreams as an example, where we use psychiatry and biomedicines to... Okay. When we use counseling, psychiatry, and biomedicines to heal the individual. Some other people, they go to church, you know, people pray for them, you know. Other people use Western thought, Eastern thought, you know, doing yoga, you know, try to balance, you know. And there's one tool that we don't use, or we haven't explored, or it was explored back in the day, and we're not using it, or we're not talking about it now more and more. That's using our knowledge system to dissect what's happening in the consciousness, or what is disturbed. What I observe is there is an ancestral spirit that is rising. And it is rising and it is rising. And it is easier to deduce and deal with it when you're dealing, say, with an ancestral spirit outside oneself. So if you can relate to a Steve Biko, you can relate to a Fanon, you can relate to a Soboko. But when it's an ancestral spirit that is rising within oneself, a psychiatry cannot deal with that. Church doesn't able to do that. But our own knowledge system are able to deal with that. And when I observe around, and I even look at the Rose Must Fall movement, and I see this ancestral spirit that is rising within the individual. And we don't have there are tools that are there. There is that knowledge that is out there. But many people don't have those to deduce and heal an ancestral spirit that is rising within one's own lineage. And I'm just throwing this out there because I feel that it is time that we look at from the African perspective, or using our own knowledge system. Because we go to a psychiatrist and the problem persists. We go to church, the problem persists. We do yoga, the problem persists. And one thing that we haven't tried is using our own knowledge system to find solution to the problem. And I've seen example when a person they deem as crazy, and I've seen them through using our own knowledge system, a person moving away from disharmony to being centered.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few hands, maybe 3. So I'll take those 2 first, and then let my co-writers start.
I think my question is somewhat linked to what the gentleman has just raised. What's the struggle in indulging ourselves in our own knowledge systems? And I've always sort of thought that's the privilege of writers, is that when we sit back and say, well, I don't have the talent, or I don't have the gift to write, but then the writers indulge themselves in their imagination. And so for me, it's about, for you as writers, what is the shift from, most of you have held normal jobs, or the normal jobs frustrate your writing and so on, but then what is the shift that moves you from that sort of not creative space into your creative writing?
Thank you. Thanks. I don't know how to frame this, but there was a remark that sounded like pleasure in black life is, all pleasure in black life is political. And the question is it? Can that be unpacked somewhere?
Okay. Do we have one? No, I think we've got.
I think Bumla should start.
Okay, I'll just start because I probably have the. I suppose what I mean is, not I suppose, I know what I mean. I mean that when you live as most, maybe all black people in the world, after 500 years of violence designed to annihilate us internally and physically, we often assume to not have pleasure, and B, to kind of forced into a position where we have to apologize for the mere entitlement to pleasure. And so I think that in many ways, what's happening in many kind of globally, what's happening historically in many kind of global radical black movements, and people insist on black love, for example, or black is beautiful, or I think for me, well, it seems to me that part of what that is saying, part of what that liberation is also about recognizing that black people aren't just reactive and externally constituted, right? So part of mattering, part of being, I'm trying not to say human because I don't want to be accused of being humanist, but part of being a person, part of being a person is pleasure, right? But for many, so I think, so when I say pleasure is political for black people, I'm saying the insistence on pleasure for black people and the insistence on not being apologetic is political. It's a big part of how we black in ways that are for ourselves. So that's what I mean. I mean it's something that we need to be less apologetic about. And I think I'm saying something that I find value in those of us who are unapologetic about. Because I'm thinking, well, in this context and in other contexts, so what part of what's making this part of what makes this literature festival so wonderful is that there's certain work we don't have to do, I don't have to do, right? That I often have to do at other literature festivals. And as someone who also teaches literature and kind of produces academic work on literature, there's a certain footnoting and qualification and bracketing and that has to happen before you do what you need to do, right? And there's a certain kind of, oh my God, what is that sounding like? And I don't mean that in an apologetic sense for non-black people. I mean also in terms of kind of, there's often real danger in being misheard that isn't danger for you, but that has complications for other people. And so the pleasure in being here is not having, is in knowing that it's not like every single black person is going to know what I'm saying, and they don't need to, but that's fine. In ways that, and I can still enjoy, and I can take risk, and I can take pleasure in the risk, and be open to consequences that don't scare me and give me responsibility for harming other black people in ways that I always have to in predominantly non-black spaces. So I can be indulgent, and I can talk about loving blackness in louder and messier and less coherent, and it's fine if I don't finish my sentences, and the poor writers who have to answer my questions then have to figure out what I said in ways that I would worry slightly more about in a different context. So that's what I mean. So I'm saying it's absolutely crucial. It's absolutely crucial as part of just being ourselves and existing in the world and claiming that we own the world, but also in creating ourselves and playing and risking and so I mean that's really what I meant. I didn't mean so like also like so for example I'm gonna get killed, but I'm going to say it, especially in a black space. I'm the Kwaito generation, right? Because you people like that funny thing that you like, that you put Kwaito now. But we who in our 40s are like, what is this thing that these kids listen to, which is so bad? Like our Kwaito, right? And so for example, okay, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time, but I'm like 2 sentences. So working in the academy and reading scholarship on Kwaito, it is the worst thing in the world, in the main. Like it's the shoddiest, it's like none of the people who do this, like maybe 3 or 4 of the people who like do the scholarship actually have ever listened to Kwaito. And I'm not even talking about young, I'm talking about people kind of old, my age and older, right? Because that's the bulk of the people who are writing about it. But it's atrocious, because it's like, oh, it's the apolitical, in the same way the Bond Frees are so apolitical until Fuse must fall, Rose must fall, and outside of it's like, oh my God. Or, you know, this thing about illegibility. And so when you say, yeah, well, you know, maybe don't pathologize, even if you think Kwaito is not political, which is ridiculous, right? It's not political as in black power, it's political.
Indigenous, all of that, right? Because I think for those of us who come into this complexity of the colonial experience, we have to find a way to negotiate all of these things all at the same time, right? So, and my answer also relates to the question around the writing. I can honestly say that writing saved my life. I can speak to what Kosi is saying, and we've had this conversation previously. I am someone who, I come from a family, the maternal side of my family, we have traditional healers. My grandmother was a traditional healer who didn't follow her calling, so my entire life, she died when I was 16. My entire life I knew my grandmother to be someone who limps, but there was not a medical explanation for why she limps, right? So there's that circulating, right? But I think there's also, or at least I can speak for me in that there was something that happened when I sat, right? So I come from a family of professionals. There's no question that you go to university. You go to university where, like, it's not a question. Did the degree, I have a bachelor's honors degree in marketing communications. Got the job, worked at Cadbury, sold chocolate and gum. Lived in Fourways for a number of years, was making an insane amount of money, right? But I was dying inside. Like, I was literally dying. I mean, this is not a brag, but I always tell people this story. I was 26 years old. I bought myself a duplex in Fourways, which cost over R1 million at 26, right? And to live with that all by yourself. I was making more money than my parents made collectively at 26 years old, right? And to sit with this slow dying on a daily basis, it felt like there was a hole opening up inside of myself every day. And I had to walk away from all of that. I had to let it go, right? So over the past 4 years, I've literally attempted the saving project through. One was Vanguard with Panache, right? Where we created a space where we can imagine ourselves into being. I mean, it's almost the tagline for Abantu, but it's just like Vanguard was also that project, right? So where can we go be black people and be complex, right? And be complex and to be okay with the fact that when I was 19, I had to go see a psychologist and a psychiatrist at the same time, because I couldn't wake up in the morning because I had to go write exams, and I just don't want to live, right? Right? So how does all of that, right, factor into trying to live or coming to the center of who you are, right? So for me, it was the realization that if I do not sit in front of my computer and make up words, my parents are going to lose me very young, right? And I think for me, it is not necessarily an investment in an indigenous knowledge practice, but I think it is a return to, right, a return to self and a return to, right? Because there's so much out there that says, but you must be all of these things. And I was a victim of that, right? And I'm still, as I said, great empathy for my parents, but I think even they've seen how I've been a different child in the past 4 years as a result of this, right? My mom was telling me the other day that, but you need to find a job. But I was like, but I'm writing, right? I'm writing. I'm just not making any money from the writing, but I come home more often. There was a time where I was just like, I could not, right? I could not, and it's my experience is that I come from a household where there was never a question about like, what is your sexuality, who do you love, and all of these things. But there were other things that made it difficult for me to enter that space, right? In terms of, well, what are your expectations of me, right? How can I then live my life as honestly as I possibly can, right? So one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever made in my life was to sell my house in 4 ways and to scale down my life and to let go of the friends that I had and to try and create new ones and to create a new way of being in this world, right? And a lot of that has been through the writing exercise. Just last thing, I was saying earlier that Zukiswa yesterday, or Pumla and Yusibas in their talk said, you know, there's the Zukiswa Vanna test of who is an author and a writer. And I just like, I have not published 3 books, so I'm not an author. I have not published even 1, so I'm not a writer. But I think I doodle very well on my laptop, right? And I think part of that is to allow ourselves the patience, right? And to allow ourselves the patience to seek traditional help, to seek psychiatric help, right? And to try and see how all of these things can live together. Because I'm not interested in an essentialist project because we are so complex as a result of the colonial project that none of us can ever claim any stake to any sort of purity about being black, African, or whatever.
Thank you very much. I have had multiple signs that we are out of time. So I'm going to thank you very much. I think that's a fantastic note to kind of wrap up on not apologizing for indulging and writing being indulgent, but also on writing as life-saving, right? And I mean, I think in a country where we very often are told that, oh, the artists and the writers, and not only do you not pay them, but also it's stuff that you do to escape from real things like sex, right? Like science, engineering, and technology. But then, you know, so I think that's a very, very, please join me in thanking my co-panelists, Please note that Makosa Baba's books and Eusebius Makeza's books are on sale at the booksellers and African Flavor Books, and mine, but also that this time next year, when I finish chairing this panel, I'll say, and Tato Mahano's books are also on sale. So look out, remember the name, you can thank me later.
I was actually even feeling a